Hi, and welcome to my very first YouTube video. I recently saw the film Anatomy of a Fall, and I'm very active on Reddit, and people on this platform seem to love this film. There are hundreds of memes about it, and I asked myself, where does this fascination with Anatomy of a Fall come from? So therefore, this video is dedicated to Anatomy of a Fall, and I am going to talk about three big topics that this film is about. And the first one is privacy and the public. Then I'm going to talk about fiction and nostalgia. And the third and probably most important topic is going to be care work and mental load. So first of all, I'm going to give you a little summary of the film. Spoilers alert. Sorry to everybody who hasn't seen it so far. But even if you listen to the summary, I still think it's a film worth watching since I liked it very much. So here you can see the three main characters, Sandra, Samuel, and Daniel. Sandra is a German novelist. She's a best-selling author. Samuel is French, so they're a bilingual couple, and they have a son called Daniel. And before the events of the film happen, when Daniel was still a small child, he had an accident that left him partially blind. And the family used to live in London, but due to the high cost of doctors and Daniel's therapy, they have to move, and they move to Samuel's home village, which is a tiny community in the French Alps. And they move to this very isolated mountain chalet that Samuel renovates and wants to turn into an Airbnb. So the very first scene that we see is Sandra, who is a very well-known author, giving an interview to a literary studies student when suddenly loud music blasts through the house. And it's Samuel who plays this music, which, by the way, is an instrumental version of 50 Cent's PIMP, a nice little callback to the early 2000s here. And then they have to cancel the interview because it's way too loud to continue. The next thing we see is that Daniel leaves the house with his guide dog Snoop to go on a walk, and when they come back, they find Samuel's dead body. And it's unclear whether this was a suicide, an accident, or a murder. Very soon, the police starts investigating, and Sandra becomes the main suspect. Therefore, she has to go to trial, and at the end, Daniel, who is the main witness, talks about a story that I'm going to talk about later, which basically clears his mom so that she wins the trial. However, it's not clear what actually happened. It's not revealed whether Sandra killed Samuel, whether it was an accident or a suicide. We don't know. And that's maybe that's maybe one of the reasons why the film is so intriguing, because it remains a mystery until the very end. The film was quite successful. At the Oscars, it was nominated as Best Picture, but unfortunately lost to Oppenheimer. And Sandra Hüller, who plays Sandra, was nominated as Best Actress, but she unfortunately lost to Emma Stone. However, Justine Triet, the director and screenwriter, and her partner Arthur Harari, also screenwriter, they won the Oscar for Best Adapted Screenplay. And Messi the dog, who plays Snoop the dog, stole the show at the Oscar ceremony. The main setting of the film is the isolated mountain chalet that the family has moved into. Here you can see a little sketch that somebody made on Instagram called F Plein Croissant. I hope I pronounced that correctly. I thought it looked very nice. And the window at the very top, the one that's open, is the window that Samuel falls from. Or maybe he didn't fall, maybe he jumped. We don't know. Here you can also see the open window. And by the way, if you like the look of this house, you can spend your next holidays there. According to this tweet, it's on Airbnb and you can actually rent it for 90 euros per night. Interestingly, this house is perceived in a very different manner by Sandra and Samuel. While for Samuel, it seems to represent his home village, a sanctuary, a place to calm down, to feel at home. For Sandra, it's more like a prison. I included this little quote here. She says, "I left my shithole in Germany and ended up stuck here in his shithole." It's fucking absurd, isn't it? And I think, but that's pure speculation because it's never mentioned in the movie, but one of the reasons why the family moved to this isolated mountain chalet, apart from the financial difficulties, to me seems the fact that Sandra cheated on Samuel multiple times, as it is revealed later in the movie. And I think Samuel made her move there so that she is isolated and she can't cheat on him again. But as I said, that's pure speculation on my part. So I really want to recommend this book here to everybody. It's called Home by Alison Blunt and Robyn Dowling, and it contains numerous chapters on different topics connected to the concept of the home. And one of the quotes I found in this book matches my first topic very well because it's also about privacy in the public. It says, "Home is neither public nor private, but both. Home is not separated from public political worlds, but is constituted through them. The domestic is created through the extra-domestic and vice versa." And I think we can see this very well in the trial, because the most private aspects of Sandra's and Samuel's relationship are turned into public knowledge. And I think the worst part is when an audio file is played in court that Samuel had recorded in secret. And this audio file contains an argument that is just way too much information, because it's revealed that Samuel suffered from depression, that Sandra cheated on him multiple times, that she apparently also plagiarized part of a manuscript that he was working on, and I felt extremely uncomfortable watching this. It is also revealed, and that is actually the start of the argument, that Samuel blames Sandra for the fact that he doesn't have time to write, because he says that he does all the domestic work. He also homeschools Daniel, while Sandra takes her time to write her books, and she's essentially the breadwinner of the family. He works as a professor part-time, but as I said, he also does all the tasks at home. And Sandra refuses to take the blame for him not being able to write. She blames it on a writer's block and tells him that if he really wanted to write, he would find the time. There is also another way in which the public sphere invades the private sphere in the film. When the police investigation starts, the police comes to the home of Sandra and Daniel with a dummy, and they push this dummy through the window through which Samuel fell or jumped to his death to see whether this could have been an accident or not. And there is also this woman from the Ministry of Justice called Marge, who then proceeds to visit Sandra and Daniel every single day to make sure that Sandra doesn't influence Daniel, who is the main witness in her trial. And all of this is a bit absurd, but also, I can also imagine how upsetting this must be as a family to have these people come to your home and invade your privacy like that. And interestingly, at the very end of the film, I think we can see how Sandra's attitude towards this very isolated home has changed. Because at the very end, she comes home after having won the trial, and she lies down on the couch with Snoop, the dog, and we can see her smiling, which hardly ever happens in the film. So I think there we can see that she, after having her private life being dissected in public like that, can finally enjoy the recluseness and the isolation of the home. And maybe even the mountain chalet became her home in that moment, because she can finally feel comfortable and at ease. The second topic I want to talk about is fiction and nostalgia, and this runs like a red thread through the entire film, because we never know what actually happened and what is fiction. We don't know whether Sandra killed Samuel or whether it was a suicide or an accident. And it's very similar with the relationship between Sandra and Samuel, because we never really know what the relationship was actually like, because we can hear this very bad, mean argument between Sandra and Samuel in court from the audio file he had recorded in secret. But we can also hear Sandra telling her son that his father was her soulmate and that she loved him and that she would have never been able to do anything to him to harm him like that. But we don't know what is the truth here. We don't know whether this was a toxic relationship or not, whether the argument was just one bad moment among thousands of good ones, or whether it was the norm. And we actually will never know because the film doesn't answer this question. And what I found really interesting was the depiction of nostalgia in the film, because we see these old photos of Sandra and Samuel throughout the film. And they are young. Some of them show the two of them with a little baby, Daniel. And we can see the looks between them that are full of love and attraction and chemistry. And this stands in a very strong contrast to this argument we can hear and see in the courtroom. And we also see Sandra watching an old video of Samuel. She's smiling while she's watching it. And so I asked myself, is she blinded by her nostalgia for the relationship? Does she perceive the relationship through rose-colored glasses and ignore the toxic aspects of it? As I said, we'll never know. I just thought it was super interesting that even the movie poster is one of these old, happy photos of the two. And that alone stands in a very strong contrast to the actual topic and conflict of the film. The third topic I want to address, which is probably the most important one, is care work and mental load. I found a review written about the film by Pooja Pillai, which I'm also going to link in the description box, where she said the film reminded her of this comic called Fallait de Monde by French comic artist Emma. And I'm just going to briefly summarize what Emma says in this comic. She talks about mental load and says that mental load means that you always have to think of everything. She gives some examples of women who think of the groceries they have to buy, what they're going to cook throughout the week, when they're going to pick up the kid from school and things like that. And Emma says that mental load usually rests entirely on women, but it's invisible. But that doesn't mean it's not there. Quite the opposite is the case. It's actually always there, and you always have to think of everything. And Emma proceeds to say that when men tell their partners, oh, just tell me if you need my help, they actually refuse to take their share of the mental load. Because if you're the woman and you have to think of everything and then think of who's going to do which task and then do your share of the tasks, then you've already done 75% of the work in total. And when I read this, I had to think of this video clip from Jimmy Kimmel Live from a couple of years ago, where they asked fathers on Father's Day what they knew about their kids. And it was very basic questions like, when is your kid's birthday? What is your kid's eye color? And the fathers weren't able to remember, while at the end they showed a mom who could answer every single question. And I just thought, yeah, it kind of makes sense. Emma didn't just invent this. And in this book that I showed you earlier, Home, there is also a very fitting quote that I'm going to read out now. Gender is a critical differentiating factor in home as a workplace because most domestic work is carried out by women. In Australia, for example, the typical woman spends 5 to 14 hours a week doing unpaid housework. The typical Australian man spends less than 5. In the UK, women do more housework than men in 93% of households, even in households where both men and women are working full-time. Women spend more time than men on housework, even when single and working full-time. And when women start to cohabit, their time spent doing housework goes up, while men's declines. This divergence occurs regardless of the amount of time women are spending in paid work. And I thought this last part about cohabiting was especially interesting. So now you might have noticed something, because all these sources claim that women do most of the unpaid housework and have most of the mental load. But in the film, it's vice versa. When I talked about the argument between Sandra and Samuel earlier, I already said that the reason why he starts the argument is because he feels like there is an imbalance between them when it comes to housework and household chore. And Sandra says that he doesn't believe in reciprocity in the couple. So basically, the stereotypical gender roles that we usually have in heterosexual relationships are swapped, because it's Sandra who is the breadwinner and who doesn't take her share of the mental load, while Samuel does all the household chores without having the career he dreams of, that is that of a writer, like his wife. And Justine Triet, the director and screenwriter of the film, commented on that. She said, I think that the fundamental question of the film is the question of reciprocity in the couple. I think that also culturally, women have always been at home, and men have gone out into the world and have had the time to think, to reflect, to have ideas. Women didn't have that time because they had to take care of domestic tasks. And so the fact of having a female character who's a creator, who writes books, who is in the position at last of taking time to write, means that it's the man who suffers. And oh, does Samuel suffer from that. There's a little quote that I took from the film where Samuel says, I live with you and you impose everything. You impose your rhythm, your use of time. You even impose your language, referring to the fact that he, a Frenchman, and her, a German, communicate in English, although they're living in France. But then Sandra replies that it's a compromise for both of them. And something that I asked myself, and that also many reviewers asked themselves, was whether the fact that these stereotypical gender roles are swapped influences our perception of Sandra being guilty or innocent. And I thought that was super interesting because I really asked myself, if she was this stereotypical woman who maybe if she homeschooled the kid and did all the household chores, maybe we would think she was innocent, or maybe we would perceive her as more innocent than we do. And something that adds to this is that Sandra is not the, let's say, stereotypically feminine woman or traditionally feminine woman, because she doesn't wear makeup, she has short hair, she doesn't wear dresses or skirts, and she doesn't really show emotions that much. Like, we don't see her crying in court. We don't see her being desperate in court. And that might also add to our perception of her being guilty or innocent. Also, in an interview that I read with Justine Triet, I found really interesting that she said that when she suggested to Sandra Hüller, who plays Sandra in the film, that she could cry in several scenes, Sandra Hüller refused because she said that this wouldn't match her character, and that Sandra is not somebody, or is not a character who tries to manipulate people, aka the jury and the audience of the film, with her tears and with her emotions, because she's a very rational person. And I thought that was so interesting. I also had to think of The Angel in the House. For those of you who don't know, that is a poem by Coventry Patmore from the 19th century, in which he portrays a woman as this idealized version of a wife and mother who's very self-sacrificing and basically does everything to make her husband and children happy while not thinking about herself at all. And this, as I already said, stands in a very strong contrast to Sandra, who takes her time to write and who puts her work first sometimes, and who does create instead of doing household chores. And maybe as a little conclusion, I'm going to read out another last quote from Justine Triet. She says, I've put a lot of time into thinking about what it truly means to be a woman, to have authority as a woman, and how we're treated as monsters for behaving in certain ways that men are usually forgiven for. Again, relating to the stereotypical share of mental load and care work in heterosexual relationships. So I think the film does a great job at addressing these topics in a way that is not too obvious, but you can still catch it and discuss about it and really think about it. And I think it's a really cool way to criticize these stereotypical gender roles in heterosexual relationships by swapping them. So that's basically it from me. Thank you so much for watching. And I'm not entirely sure what the focus of this channel is going to be. It's definitely going to be pop culture focused, and I think I'm going to do most videos about films because I'm a huge film nerd and I also do my PhD about films, But you can obviously also let me know what topics would interest you in the comments. And again, thank you so much for watching. And I'm looking forward to doing more on this channel. See you soon!